Today, we are going to learn about what is cloud and what are the cloud service model which is currently available. So basically, to understand the cloud, so we need to go back a little bit on the current on-premises environment, how the applications are run in the data centers. So basically, companies buy hardware and they buy OS from companies like Microsoft or open source companies like Red Hat or others who say or some Linux versions, and they buy other softwares like SQL Server and other components, and they will run on top of them, and they will manage everything end to end. That means like they will run their own compute, storage, and networking and software on top of that. And on top of that, they will run the application. So this is how a typical end-to-end application stack will look like in a data center. And when things get evolved, we had a new model called cloud, wherein there is a cloud provider which provides all these components like compute, storage, networking, and the software which needs to run on top of this uh, base infrastructure. And then the user comes in and just he can deploy his own version of software or the application version, and he can use it. So that's what the cloud means. And the basic difference here is that instead of capital expenses which needs in a data center, so the customer can use as pay as you go model, and then they can just pay only for how many hours or how many minutes or even how many seconds they use a particular service, and that's where their budget or their spending ends. So this is really a good model, and most of the companies, especially startups, are getting larger benefits, so they don't need to spend it initially, and in case something goes wrong, they can wind up easily. So this is the basic understanding of cloud. And in the cloud, we have basically three major service model, cloud service model available, and we will look at what is each one of them. To start with, we can have infrastructure as a service model, so which I have shared currently. So the leftmost one which you see is having all the stacks starting from networking, storage, servers, virtualization, on top of it OS, on top of it middleware, runtime, data, and applications. So this entire stack will normally run in a data center. But here in infrastructure as a service model, the cloud service provider takes some of the headaches from the customer away, and they manage it for the customer. And remaining parts, customer will manage themselves on top of what the cloud service provider provides. So here basically all the stacks starting from networking, storage, and servers, and until the virtualization part, cloud service provider will run for the customer. And then once the customer choose the right OS, and he can run his own middleware runtime, and he can host his data on the application on top of it. So this is a typical infrastructure as a service model, where normally customer won't have networking or infra specialist, but just they have people to manage the OS and stack on top of it. And the next model which evolved from the infrastructure as a service model was the platform as a service model, in which even the cloud service provider tried to take few more stacks away from the customer so that they will manage it for them, and only the data and applications are hosted directly by the customer, whereas like even the middleware OS and the runtime is even provided by the cloud service provider itself. So from the customer perspective, like they don't need to manage even few more components like server and runtime, which they don't care, and cloud service provider takes care of it automatically. In this case, normally it helps in auto scaling and other management of load, etc. So that's pretty good thing for a customer. And the third model is called software as a service model, or SaaS. So in this case, like, the entire stack is operated by the cloud service provider itself, and the customer comes in and he can signs up the service and uses his data. That's it. So everything is provided by the cloud service provider. So there are both advantages and disadvantages in all the three models. If you start with infrastructure as a service, the customer has more control of the OS stack. So what version of OS he needs to run and what middleware he needs to run, and he can control each and everything. So if we move on to PaaS, he had control on only the data and the application version he need to deploy, but the runtime, OS, and middleware is fixed. And if we move on to SaaS model, everything is almost fixed except the data. So if we move on to left to right, the control, uh, the customer control on the cloud reduces drastically, but at the same time, the management and other overhead is reducing so much. So it depends on what exactly the customer wants to run. He needs to choose the right service model. So that's all for today, and tomorrow we can look at with another interesting topic. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.